Hello, everyone, and welcome to an all-new episode of That Star Trek Podcast, your place for a detailed analysis and speculation of all things Trek. My name is Sean Ray, and I know how to make plomeek soup in a toilet. Joining me in tonight's roundtable discussion, we have Neek. How are you?
Does this look like an engineering place?
You got that accent down. We have Chris is here as well. How's it going, Chris?
This podcast was supposed to happen in 1992. I've been waiting 30 years.
Scott is joining us. How are you, sir?
I noticed that I'm joining us for the third episode in a row in this season without hosting my own show, but that's okay.
You didn't host last week. You didn't host last week because you gave it to Rick.
People don't have to know that. That's inside baseball.
And Rick is here as well. How you doing, sir?
It ruins my joke.
I haven't taken a math class since Pythagoras made the crap up.
All right. Tonight we will be discussing the third episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 3, which was titled Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, written by David Reed, directed by Amanda Rowe. La'an travels back in time to 21st century Earth to prevent an attack that will alter humanity's future history. So as usual, we'll go around the panel and get our first impressions from everyone. So we'll kind of know where everyone stands on this episode. Neek, what do you think of this episode?
Yeah. I have mixed feelings. I liked the tone, so I thought it did the same sort of thing as like Voyage Home, where it was, mostly buddy comedy, and I thought the chemistry between La'an and Kirk was good. And then, every once in a while something serious would happen, and so I thought that was fine. Everything in terms of like the time travel, I was fine with. Like, I felt that's the only part of the story that held up, really. Because everything else, all the other writing was, I'll be generous and say bizarre and leave it at
that. Rick, what about you? What do you think?
Okay, last week was definitely the best episode of Strange New Worlds to date, certainly in what I consider to be in the top 10 of Star Trek in general. The pendulum has swung the other way. I did not care for this episode, and I think it's fitting. It just dawned on me that the title Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow is from Macbeth. Seems appropriate. It's a tired premise. There were some good moments, but I know that it's a Trek tradition to set an episode in the time, as Nick put it in your recap. Wow, we've come back to the same time and place that the show is being made. Did they have to do that? And I do disagree. I don't think that the two of them have any chemistry together whatsoever. There were moments. There were good moments. It wasn't painful to watch, and I was dreading the second watch, but actually the second time, now that I knew what was coming, it wasn't a painful experience, but it just the time management, not the time travel, but just you don't get from Toronto to Vermont, and Vermont is not a small place, and it just the whole thing was just so contrived. Once they got back in time, it was just making me crazy.
Okay, Scott, what about you?
There were a few things that were, fine, okay with this episode. I didn't mean to complain about not hosting the show. It was supposed to be a joke. I don't know if it read. Sorry. It was a joke. So there were a couple things in the episode that were fine. Overall, didn't love it. A lot of the logic didn't really flow. I'm sure that we're going to get to it, but exactly how long did Kirk spend playing chess? Because that's quite possibly the most expensive hotel penthouse I've ever seen.
I mean, even like a junior suite. I mean, come on. I mean, yeah, because there was only one bedroom.
but still, there were multiple rooms in that hotel room. The
That room
fancy
was the size of
schmancy-
a stateroom on the Enterprise, for crying out loud.
Hotel suite.
That's the
Yeah.
size of an ensign's quarters on the Enterprise, for crying out loud. I'm sorry, the new Enterprise.
fancy schmancy fireplace in against the wall. And
Well, and plus they had to pay for all the bus tickets and the cabs and everything to get to Vermont.
and-
So like exactly like was
And
he
bribe
paying
the border guards. They
Yeah,
don't come
bribe-
cheap.
yes,
bribing
and
the-
all
yeah.
all the bribery. So like how much money did he make playing chess?
yeah, and
Well,
and
I mean,
Mary,
he probably
you're right,
got the
fact
room
that it was-
on. He probably got the room on Priceline or something, so he got a good deal for it.
But they have no
no.
credit card.
He-
Did they steal a credit card? They didn't show us that scene.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He paid for this room in cash, which
yeah.
is not going to happen in the first place because a hotel with that kind of room is not going to just take cash. They're going to want a credit card for afterward. And yeah, considering that it was also taking place in our present, which means it ain't going to be cheap. So that was a big issue with me. I think oddly enough, also the chemistry and the relationship forming between the two of them, I didn't like that either because it was so rushed and it came out of nowhere. And all that I could pull together was, okay, La'an seems to be forming an attachment to him because she thinks that he looks cute with his shirt off, because that's about all that we got that was really, clear on the screen. The thing that I feel I almost had the least problem with is what I'm sure most of the critics online hate the most about the episode, which is the retconning. And I was okay with it.
I liked it.
Oh, I thought
that was
the retcon was brilliant.
It's
Yeah.
about
That was-
time.
Yeah, that was the only good thing about the episode.
Yeah. I mean, it could have been presented a little bit differently. And by that, I mean that the undercover agent, we'll say until we get later in the discussion, could have maybe just slowed down a little bit, because I'm certain that half of the people that are complaining about the change in canon are complaining because they didn't catch the explanation because it went by so quickly. But it was there and I caught it and I appreciated that. They made the effort and they took the time and they gave an explanation. So that satisfied me just fine. And it also harkened back to the temporal Cold Wars, and I like Enterprise references.
All right, Chris, what about you?
For everything Scott just said, I agree, but just oddly flaccid episode of something I think I should have loved. I complained last week about who I thought the most annoying character on SNW is. Now I know who the most boring character on SNW is, and just take your pick of either of the two that were featured in this episode. Although I did like that little bit of retconning. So yeah, I wanted more. I wanted to blame myself because I watched this on my phone, like disjoint, like over 3 sittings in a non-optimal environment, but I don't think that would have saved it based on what all y'all are saying. So
This is interesting because I
I-
came into this recording feeling nervous that I was going to be shitting all over this episode, but now I'm getting into defense mode. Everyone's hating it, and
Well-
I'm going to be the one defending this one. Go ahead, Sean.
I will say I like this episode, and I'm
Okay.
the odd man out because I wasn't here last week, and everybody was praising last week's episode. I did not like last week's episode, but this week, when I look at the pieces of the puzzle, it doesn't look like something that I would enjoy, because it didn't feel like a Star Trek episode because they weren't on a ship very much. There wasn't a lot of phasers and starships and stuff like that. This was more, it was set in present day for the most part, and I don't like Paul Wesley's portrayal of Kirk. I didn't like him last time. I don't like him now. And La'an is not my favorite character, but I felt like at the end of this, I felt like I knew her better. And I liked the episode, even though I felt like Picard had already done this in season 2, this go back in time and try and stop the events of the future from being an alternate timeline and all that kind of stuff. I felt like they had already done this, but I felt like this was done pretty well. And then the end of the episode I enjoyed. But yeah, there was a lot of stuff that happened throughout the episode. I was like, no, why'd they do it that way? And then that doesn't work. Why'd they get so much money for playing chess? Stuff like that. And I felt like I could feel Rick and Chris's temperature rising the whole time I was watching it anyway.
But they fixed so much for me. I really did enjoy just some errant lines, just some off the cuff lines that if you're paying attention as a Trekkie, or Trekker, I'm sorry, whoever I offended with either or both of those statements, that they finally at least acknowledge that stuff. And even you said, Sean, on the chat that we all share, it's like they were listening to you guys last week.
Yeah.
So I mean, I appreciated that about it, and there were other things I really did like about it, but on the whole, it was just like, I don't know why, just the whole thing just did not in any way engage me.
I do wonder who Anson Mount pissed off this season, because he's barely on the show anymore. Like, we're in episode 3 and he's only really been in one episode, and it wasn't even like a captain in the chair type episode. It was it was a courtroom drama.
He had one scene in the first episode, one scene in this one, but I think that Neek did make a solid point in her recap of this latest episode that could have something to do with it. I wasn't aware that had happened, but that could be the reason.
Maybe the reason Anson Mount is not around is because in real life he had a child and he wants to actually take care of his child. Or another theory is just that the reason he and Rebecca Romaine are not around a lot is because they cost too much. And
that could be.
And I mean, this entire episode taking place in not a set also supports that theory that they're just trying to do things cheap. So could be one or both of these things. So,
Yeah,
traditionally why Star Trek
the only problem I have with the child thing is that they started filming this before season 1 ever even came out.
Right, and that's when he had the child. The child he had the child 2 years ago or something. Yeah.
Okay,
so
well,
that the timing actually makes sense. So John has just written something. Should I read it? Because he said
go ahead.
He can't join us, but he says that he loved this episode.
He requested that someone read the whole message on the air, so whoever wants to do it.
Okay, I've got it here. So I love that it focused on a single crew member. I love that it used a buttload of tropes, but did it well. I love that I'm familiar enough with Trek episodes and con to appreciate the references, but not so familiar that I'm precious about what they can, can't, shouldn't do based on canon. I love the old school Twilight Zone vibes, and I loved Christina Chong's performance in this episode. That last call to Kirk was surprisingly affecting. I was also impressed with Paul Wesley as Kirk this episode. And yes, even though it was poutine level cheesy, I love that they ended the show with a close-up of a watch, because time. I hope everyone else agreed with me, but I'd be kind of shocked if you did. I agree with John. I think probably more than the rest of you. I liked Christina Chong's performance. I like Paul Wesley. I know everyone doesn't like his Kirk, but I was never a fan of Shatner, and so I actually don't mind new interpretations of Kirk. So I'm kind of, I'm on board. I think I liked this episode more than the rest of you, Sean, accepted. And John, obviously.
I don't mind Wesley as Kirk. He just because of not because of anything he does, just his physicality reminds me a little too much of Jim Carrey's Kirk in the Living Color spoof they did. He does a fine job. And I didn't have a problem with any of the canon stuff in this whatsoever. I think that we really needed something, because I think we talked about this, maybe it was last week, Chris, that somewhere I got the headcanon that because of all the mucking about in time, the eugenics wars, the timing of it got moved, kind of like in the Terminator movies, where they're like, yeah, you can change the timing of stuff, but it still happens.
Yeah, I feel like Neek pointed out as a Voyager fan that we had to force ourselves to retcon the eugenics wars somehow.
Yeah.
And at least this episode gave us a nod towards that with one errant line. And that was enough for me. It's fine. So I don't know what happened. I don't know why it happened, but I know there were temporal Cold Wars in Enterprise. I know they brought them up in Disco. So the fact that a Romulan agent could go back and say, this was supposed to happen in 1992. I've been stuck here for 30 years. WTF? You know, like, to me, that's me. I'm WTF. I'm right there with her. So, you know, I just like that they finally gave a nod to the fact that it's been so freaking inconsistent.
I feel like it kind of sets up something that may be revisited later on, because it's not just the fact that the eugenics wars may have taken place at a different time than what we knew originally. All of canon can be kind of a little more fluid, because you think about it, anytime that you time travel, you're probably going to change something, no, regardless of what you do. So First Contact could have created an alternate timeline, and then when the Borg went back on Enterprise, that creates something else, you know.
The voyage home also.
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of think that, yeah, well, maybe the stuff that we saw, maybe it's a little bit different going forward, because, you know,
Well,
things are
that's it.
changing, and you've got the what's the department of what? The department of
Temporal
what? What?
investigations.
Temporal investigations, yeah.
The department of wibbly wobbly stuff. Yeah.
The only thing that I have that gives me pause, and Sean, I was adamantly against your supposition that because the Borg traveled back and then we saw them in Enterprise, that we're in like an altered timeline from that point on. But I'm thinking, but this is leading up to everything we've ever seen. I have kind of the same problem with this one. I don't mind that they're trying to retcon the fact that maybe the eugenics wars happened later than they originally posited. But if we're going to the fact that Strange New Worlds is going to dovetail into TOS, and in TOS it happened in 1992, how does that reconcile? That's
because
all.
this is a different timeline. So the Department of, what is it, the Temporal Investigations,
Mhm.
Mhm.
they're Scott Bakula. They're constantly trying to make right what once went wrong in the timeline. And so there was a timeline in TOS, and now everything else we're seeing, because like every series has had multiple time travel episodes. And so each time they travel back in time, we're getting a new timeline. It's a new timeline constantly, constantly, constantly. So there isn't even a prime timeline. It's all just close enough. It's all just enough of the beats are being fulfilled that the time police are like, you know what? Okay, good enough. We're enough on track. And so that accounts for all the differences we're seeing across series. That's why sometimes Kirk is a bit pudgy, played by a Canadian, and sometimes he's really lean, because, you know, it was a different sperm inseminating a different egg, and they was still called Kirk, so they're a little bit different.
Wow. I mean,
So they're just, these are all just different timelines, and the time police are saying, you know what, good enough. We've got a Kirk. We needed a Kirk. We've got a Kirk. It's okay that he's a little bit different than OG Kirk.
That Kirk, and we have not, until the end of this episode, we have not met canon Kirk, because for the both
first
of the
one-
times that we've seen
Yeah.
exactly. It was
Kirk,
an
he's been
alternate
from an
timeline.
alternate timeline.
Both
Yeah.
times, yeah.
Mhm.
And then
Which is
this
pretty
time
amazing, right?
he's wearing a different insignia.
And why would
But
they
he's
have
still
the
got the
exact
deltas all over
same
his sleeve.
Enterprise, right? They have the exact same Enterprise, but it's a
Because
completely
the
different.
engineers who built that Enterprise, you know, the temporal police made sure that they were there to design their Enterprise. That was another thing that the time police have been looking out for.
I'm wondering if the way to start looking at things as far as timelines go is the way it's been referred to for years now, as far as the prime timeline is, okay, this is one specific timeline that moves in this direction, and that's what we've been seeing. And the Abrams movies take place in a different timeline, and time travel episodes can sometimes show us an alternate. But a lot of people, a lot of fans have been viewing the prime timeline as this is the one that's real and this is the one we pay attention to. I wonder if, and I have not really thought this through, so there might be holes in this idea, but I think what we should consider as the prime timeline is whatever we see on our screen even if what we see on our screen in TOS, in SNW, in Disco, Picard, whatever, if they happen to take place in different timelines, if Strange New Worlds, starting from this episode forward, is in a slightly different timeline than the original TOS took place in, it's still Prime because it's what we are being shown. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a good way to at least give yourself some kind of inner peace, right?
Yeah, it's absolutely headcanon, but it's a way to, for the people who are like, you know, on the fence as far as, you know, do they want to be gatekeepers or do they want to just, you know, shut the hell up and enjoy Star Trek as it's presented to us? It might allow them to, you know, relax a little bit and just accept, okay, the Prime timeline is what we're seeing, even if there is some overlap in the actual timelines that the characters are participating in. It might be shifting back and forth. There might be overlap. There might be differences, parallels, whatever. But Prime is what we watch,
Well, you
whatever
know,
timeline that's in, and it might help people to just kind of, you know, unclench their starfish a little bit and just enjoy the show.
You did not just say
I would have
this
said
whole-
balloon knot, but I also, except for the JJ verse, which went out of its way to say we're in an alternate timeline. So, although I liked Pine's Kirk better than I like Paul's Kirk, so I don't know.
This whole thing with Khan taking place at a later time, you know, this was all set up already in Picard.
Yeah,
Because
and
Brent
I
Spiner
was
pulled that folder
disappointed.
out.
So
I was
yeah, can you-
disappointed that they didn't reference that in this episode. The fact that they had Project Khan, there should have been something about that here.
Explain that to me, because the only thing I could think was, and just bear with me as like the TOS canonista, the fact that, okay, now they're saying that it's happened 30 years later, but why would
Mhm.
there be a Noonien Singh Institute? Because Khan is infamous for the deeds he did. So why would there be something named after that family name before he rose to power and took over a third of the world? And
He came from a rich family, and they opened an institute, and they decided that the best thing to do is experiment on their own children, and so they augmented their own kids. And then Khan became notorious, but he was from this rich family that opened an institute in Toronto.
Yeah, the institute was not named after him. He was named after the founders of the institute, and then in the fullness of time, he very much eclipsed the family that opened the institute.
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
mean, so you can kind of say that La'an is not really a descendant of Khan. She just is a descendant from the bloodline, or wherever that
And
name came from.
what's the difference?
Well,
Because-
the difference is that her genetic marker apparently worked to open the doors, which I never heard of that, of someone
Hmm.
having their locks based on genetics that are like so precise that they like carry on for hundreds of years. And I mean, so she's related to whoever the institute is named after, because presumably whoever we see opening the door in that scene where they learned that the door can be opened with a handprint, presumably she's related to that person. And Khan may or may not also be related, because it was very strange to me that he would also have that genetic marker. Because why would you let your essentially prisoner child have access to these doors? Either way, it's so whether or not Lon is genetically related to Khan, why the F did her parents not change their name?
Yeah,
If it's
yeah.
so, if it's such a burden to be named Hitler, you change your name from Hitler.
Yeah,
All the
yeah.
people who were in the 40s related to Hitler, after the war was over, they changed their names because that's
Yeah,
what
you
do.
don't
I'll
run
do you-
into a
I'll-
whole lot of Mussolinis these days.
I'll do you one better. Harpo Marx was named Adolf, and he changed his name to Arthur. So even the first name is enough as of a stigma, right?
Yes.
So yeah.
The handprint, so I was wondering when I saw the episode, and then Nick, I saw in your recap where you were talking about it, and it reminded me. Could the handprint thing, the fact that the door's open because she puts her hand there, could that be a car keys behind the trash can or jail keys behind the trash can kind of scenario from Bill and Ted, where this Department of Temporal Investigations later on they go back and set it up so that her hand will open that.
Maybe
That's
just
a-
any
they can
hand
go
will
back-
open it. Nobody thinks of it.
it's
They
a-
can go back further and they can program it so that her hand will open that door.
That's a really big stretch for headcanon when I think the shorter road is the more likely road, which is the writers needed a way to just make this happen. So they just hand waved it as, yeah, her hand will work.
And
So
she didn't
what's
even take her glove off.
what's next on the
But
list?
you only need the fingertips.
What's next on the list? Oh, they need to get money. We'll just have Kirk play chess. That'll get them plenty of money for a penthouse suite and border crossings and buses and Ubers and food and everything.
Yeah, it was a lot of lazy writing and frankly a lot of really offensive things. I felt the absolutely incompetent police officer who lets Kirk go,
Yeah,
that offended me. That deeply offended me. And the bribing of two border guards, an American and a Canadian border guard, were apparently bribed, and that also offended me. I'm like, that's not just lazy writing. That's you being an asshole.
Yeah, that's just hand wavy. We don't want to deal with that part, so we're just gonna
But
write a line into the script.
There are
Yeah.
a million ways to solve these problems that they've written themselves into, and that's what they go with. Like, screw
Well,
you.
the biggest thing would have been don't put Pirelli. What's her name? Pirelli.
Yeah, Pelia. Why
Pelia.
have
Yeah,
her be in Vermont?
don't put her
Why
in
not have
Vermont.
be in Sudbury. Like,
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
set it up in the first act, so they had to have it in the third act.
But they
It's-
didn't have to set it up in
it's
Vermont.
Pelly
They
and
didn't have to
Son,
set that up,
right?
yeah.
I have a warehouse in Manitoba or wherever,
Yeah,
where they don't
Speaking
have
of
to-
gun,
I don't know what's
Speaking
close
of
to
gun,
Ontario, but
my aunt totally left that gun sitting
yeah.
on Khan's
Yeah.
table when she left.
I think we're all like, take the goddamn gun.
I didn't even
Super-
notice because I was so honestly, I was not interested anymore. You know, it's just like, oh, of course she has to be baby Khan, and it's like, would you kill Hitler in his crib? I think you might, but she's just like, well, you lied to me, so see
Well,
ya.
she also realized by that point what the effect of killing Khan, which is what happened to cause the United Earth spaceship or whatever, United Earth fleet reality to happen, was Khan didn't exist in that timeline.
Mhm.
And that was bad. It's, I mean, we've all had, I'm sure we've all done that philosophical thing of, World War II was horrible. Millions of people were killed. But every now and then I think about, what our population problems would be if 10 million people hadn't been taken out of the equation 40 years ago or 50 years ago or whatever. I mean, it's certainly not something that was good, but we don't have, we
but
are our own
if
predators.
you knew for sure that if you killed Khan, then you would end up with the United Earth Fleet instead of Starfleet, then yeah, of course you'd let Khan live. I
Yeah.
would rather, like she said, her Earth has sunsets, and alternate Kirk's Earth was a wasteland, and
Yeah.
all she had to do was let Khan do a little bit of genocide.
My big
Go ahead.
problem with this episode is none of that stuff, remarkably, because that's all the kind of stuff that used to really get under my skin and drive me crazy. Yes, the whole, we just went from, and I don't even know the geography, but based on what you said in your recap,
In your kneecap. You should start calling them kneecaps. That would be awesome.
a concise
I-
knit cap.
I get the impression that Toronto is not terribly close to Vermont.
It's
So,
about 8 hours by car.
DC's whole
and
other
so by
country. So,
bus it'd
yeah.
be like 12 hours.
That's
so
why there
yeah,
were 4
so
buses. Yeah,
4 buses, bribery, get
Taxis.
there, get the watch, which I haven't even begun to talk about how stupid that watch idea was. And then get back in what appears to be less than 24 hours.
Mhm.
That bothered me. but not as much as I felt. Okay, I didn't have a problem with La'an, going, "Ooh, Kirk, yummy." That was fine. What I did have a problem with was the absolute bawling at the end. Not that the actress did a bad job with it. I mean, I totally believed it. I felt like there was a scene missing where it went just from, wow, this guy's hot, to I'm in love with him.
Oh no, she wasn't
it
crying
was not
because of
about
him.
love.
She was
It was
crying
not
because
about love.
all this stuff had happened and she couldn't talk to anybody about it. She had
And
gone through
that's not the impression I
this
got.
huge thing, and
Yeah.
she couldn't talk to anybody about it.
I absolutely
That's-
see where Rick
that's
is
what I
coming
got.
from,
Well,
because
we're all like chomping at the bit for this scene. So yeah.
I know exactly where Rick is coming from. It's what I thought the first time I watched it, but then after a little bit of time, it started to unravel, or not unravel, but unfurl a little bit for me. That her upset was because, as Sean said, she just had this experience and she can't tell anybody about it. And the other bit that I think got to her, not so much that, oh, this is a love connection that is lost. This is someone who actually saw me just as a person and didn't see me as a Noonien Singh.
I get that.
He doesn't see me as an augment, whether I carry any augmentations or not. That's someone that I could connect with and just have a friendship with, not necessarily romantic, but something. And that is what broke her up the most.
Can I take it one step further?
No.
It's
okay.
It's all that stuff. He saw me as a person who did not know my, genetic markers, my history, that infamous name. And I think that she was just crying because she realized at that moment that she is profoundly alone. Like, she lost this guy who could, maybe recognize her for something else, but she's back in the place where she's supposed to be, the timeline that she fixed, and she still does not relate to anybody on that ship in any profound way. And she realizes now that no matter what, and Mabinga, I think it saves that scene with Mabinga in the beginning, where he's trying to coax her out and she's just like, no, I just want to fight. She realizes that she needs to become invested in something else besides being the security officer, in something else in any way. And that whole catharsis, because it was those three separate things coming to her all at once, uniquely because of the way she time traveled, and she could only know it. And she's also, I thought that redeemed the episode for me, to be honest with you.
Well, I was going to say, Chris, where do you get off saying that you didn't like the episode when you had such a good take there? Like you obviously.
Well, that was the only thing.
That
was the only thing about the episode that I liked. Honestly,
okay.
Yeah. Like I said, the time travel Star Trek. It's fine. I did not find any chemistry between her and the supposed Kirk. I do not like Paul Wesley Shipp as Kirk, even though I know it's an alternate timeline. But is that his name?
It's not Paul Wesley Shipp. That's that's the Flash.
All right. So who's the guy?
Paul Wesley is Kirk. John Wesley Shipp.
John
played
Wesley
the Flash
Shipp.
in
I don't like
1990.
Paul Wesley Shipp as Flash either. But whatever. I liked that because it brought it back to the character in her timeline, damaged in a way that I feel like we can reconcile as we go forward. And at least if she tries to make an attempt and she tries to change things, us as viewers understand why she's doing that, even though the people on the ship might not. So that to me is good writing. That's good fiction.
I see what you're saying. I did not get that. I can see those are all valid points. I will try to plug them into my viewing of the show. I think maybe they were a little obtuse about that then, if that was what was really going on, because the fact that she called real Kirk seemed really out of character for her. But then I realized we don't really know. We don't know her character that much yet.
Okay, you go on a time travel adventure with someone, and then you get back to your timeline where that version of that person died. Of course, you're going to make sure they're still alive in this timeline, just to be sure. You're not going to just walk around and be like, I'm sure he's fine in this timeline. No, you freaking check.
Yeah, but there's ways to do it without calling him up in the middle of the night and going, "Oh, yeah, your brother."
Where was your
looking into
Where
I
was your
thought that
brother
was
born?
fine. I would have done the same thing. I mean, she was in an emotional state. She can't sleep that night if she doesn't square these things away. She's just been hugely affected by like the most important thing that's ever happened to her in her entire life, and she's just made a monumental decision, letting a killer live for the greater good. So like, yeah, of course you call him up just to be like, okay, you're alive. Okay, bye.
And to have that one moment, even though she knows that she can't tell him how she knows him and what just happened, but she can at least see his face and hear his voice just for that one last bit of connection. Even though it's not the real him that she knew, it's as close as she's going to get to talking to the one person that saw her for who she was.
The biggest problem that I had in this episode, and
I also
Nick, you
agree
might
with
be
Rick,
able to
by the
help-
way. Sorry, I had to
Nick,
jump
you-
in. Rick, I totally get it. I totally get you. Sorry.
Nick, you might be able to help me out with this. Is it normal in Canada to go to a hot dog stand and get a hot dog and put nothing on it?
No, I was like, when he's like, I'm gonna go back and get another one. I'm like, you're gonna get mustard, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's just where you spend money on a hot dog and you put absolutely nothing on it.
Get some condiments. They were right there.
maybe they don't have hot dogs in his world, so he's just
He doesn't know how to
or maybe they don't
properly
have
From
condiments
space.
in his timeline.
Yeah, maybe he doesn't know how to properly eat a hot dog because they don't have them on the wasteland that is Earth in his timeline. But here's another question about Canadian hot dog stands: is it standard to have the hot dogs served on whole wheat buns, because those are 100% whole wheat buns?
He might have
Um,
requested that if
I
he had to take a
don't
bite of it.
eat street meat. I don't eat hot dogs in Toronto.
All right,
I don't
so
know. Actually,
yeah.
you know, that's funny. They probably do, because I know it's tough to get a steamy anywhere other than Quebec. So
The what?
that's all I'll say about that. Never mind. That was a joke for someone who's not even here.
I can
I
say
did
this.
like
The-
the touch that this version of Kirk was born on the USS Iowa.
That was I was going
Because-
to bring
Cute.
that up. Yeah.
Cute.
But not
Yeah,
only that,
cute.
but you know, when they were originally making the 2009 Star Trek, the Kelvin was supposed to be called the USS Iowa. That's what it was. That was
Really?
from early versions of the script. It was going to be the USS Iowa, so that they could still say that Kirk was born in Iowa. But it got changed to the Kelvin later on. So that's
I did
Interesting.
like that when he was trying to drive the car when he started off. It was a total homage to a piece of the action when Kirk tried to drive the car in that and started by going backwards and then trying to go forwards. And
hey, at least they didn't start playing the Beastie Boys during that
I wish they would have.
chase.
I think it just needed a little bit of sabotage. That's all I'm saying.
Oh God! Enough with car chases and Star Trek.
And that-
Christ.
yeah,
no,
he
you're
went
right.
from not being able to get it out of the parking spot to doing like stuntman level
Yeah.
emergency.
Right.
Oh,
brake
yeah.
scenes and
And
shit.
then you have the
Yeah.
Romulan, like the concerned citizen saying, "You're pulling him over because he's American." No, I'm pulling him over because he did 100 in a 30-mile-per-hour zone.
Seriously,
That's
he
why I'm
stole
pulling
almost
him over.
killed someone.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he totally. It was a
Even if
he
you think
Vulcan neck
it's his
pinches
car.
that guy.
Yeah.
He Vulcan neck pinches that guy. Steals his it's a Dodge Challenger Hellcat, and he's driving it like he turns into Dominic Toretto. All of a sudden, he's in a Fast and Furious movie.
Because he's family.
Yeah. And then the song that's playing is Modern Art by the Black Lips. But okay. Rick, you wanted to touch on the watch.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I'm not an expert on watch technology. I know that there were radioactive watches and clock faces back in the 50s.
There
Um,
are radioactive watch faces on some of the radios I have in my garage. So
Mhm.
yeah. Yeah.
But it wasn't like there was a chunk of tritium inside them making them glow.
I mean,
it
you
was
don't know that.
radioactive
I mean,
paint
my
on them.
radio could like lead me to a cold fusion reactor is all I'm saying.
Well,
according to this universe. I mean,
okay,
yeah.
according to this universe, in our universe, a lot of people especially a lot of women, because they were primarily the ones employed doing this, came down with some pretty horrible cancers because their job was painting that radioactive shit on the watch dials. But be that as it may, if that reactor is pumping out that much radiation that a watch is going to glow from 250 feet away or whatever, they've got bigger problems than Romulans in that city.
Yep.
That is true.
It's all Canada. Nobody cares.
But what's definitely a good idea is just to take a stroll around Toronto, hoping you stumble upon the right place.
Toronto is what? It's like maybe 1 square mile. So
Yeah,
it'll take
no
them
big
20,
deal.
30 minutes tops, right? They can stop for another hot dog with mustard this time, right?
Easily
Well, when
done.
and also the bridge over Lake Ontario explodes while they're
That's not a real bridge, is it? By
Yeah,
the
I was
way?
gonna no.
That
no,
is not
no.
a real bridge.
That is
Okay.
I lived on
Yeah.
the other end of Lake Ontario for a little while. It's not a real bridge.
But the guy that had given her the device that sent her back in time told her you have to get to the bridge, and then she immediately goes to the bridge because she thinks that's what he means. Well, he meant the bridge. And when that bridge exploded, the first thing that I thought was, oh, please don't let Kirk die on a bridge again.
Can we talk about that scene on the bridge though? Because she walks in, kind of the same uniform, different emblem, different mission patch,
yeah.
right? And then they're like, who are you? Oh, we're going to be strangely nonplussed about it. And then talk to this Vulcan over here on the screen. And then we'll say everything we have to. And then we'll just nonchalantly turn back to say, so who is this stranger on my bridge saying they belong here? It was so weirdly paced. It was like, you would think that they're in the middle of, I guess, some kind of war or a war on many fronts. And somebody they don't know rushes on their bridge. And then they don't like immediately say security, tackle that person. Just stand there for a little while I talk to Spock. Because
listen, no matter which timeline you're in, Starfleet security officers are absolutely useless. So makes perfect sense that anyone could just walk onto a bridge and not be questioned. Every single series has had the bridge taken over at some point. They just let it happen. It's what's meant to happen.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, when the whole thing with the guy that stumbled into the corridor that gave her the device, I mean, she should have been calling the captain and medical and security and everybody to that.
Okay,
to that
all right. I'm
place,
going to stop
like,
you right there on that.
somebody
Tricorders
needs
and
to
all
call
that kind of
Pulaski in this moment.
You're thinking with TNG mentality. This is not get medical here right away. She would have to go find a wall comm and call the bridge or call sick bay.
That's true. She's got
didn't
to
have
go to
time to
some
do that.
junction, right?
They can't just shout out like they do in later series.
I feel like they've done that. I feel like they call out all the time on this show. I could be wrong. I mean, I'm not going to say.
I'm not.
but-
You could be, or I could. I don't recall them doing that in this show, but
I'd have to go back and look. I don't know if they have it set up. If you're on the ship, you just call out and the system will automatically interpret what you're saying.
It can't
and
work
connect
that
you.
way.
Not
Otherwise, we
yet.
couldn't have more troubles.
Yeah.
Because they have that scene where Kirk is at the comm and they
Oh, I'm not
inserted-
saying I'm not saying that they do it
Cisco
on
and
Star
Dax behind him.
Trek.
So yeah.
I'm saying I feel like they do it on this show. I
Oh
feel
no,
like
no,
they've
I'm
done it
just saying,
before.
like I hope you know what, I have not even, I guess because it's become so endemic of what Star Trek is, where you can just speak and you can get to the person you want to get to very clearly in a public channel somehow. You can just say number one, and all of a sudden Riker can hear you. How does the computer know that that's who he wants to talk to? You know,
Yeah.
number
AI.
one, he
AI's
could be
coming
talking
for
to
our
a
job.
toilet.
Yeah.
Number one is a pee. Number one, we're speaking to every head on the Enterprise. Anyway,
But like when we were watching the episode, and they threw their uniforms away, my wife was like, "They threw away their comm badges," and I was like, "They're not comm badges, not yet."
Right.
They're just
Yeah.
badges. Yeah, they're just badges. Okay.
and they don't need no stinking badges.
Chris, what is in
Observation.
your drink? What are the little things in your drink?
They are black cherries.
Ah, okay.
from the Manhattan that I poured into this when I poured it over the round ice.
It just looked like you had a couple of little like rocks or something.
It's poo, Rick. It's poo.
All right, observation deck. The lady that played Sarah, which, by the way, if there was a Romulan operative undercover on Earth for that long, I feel like the supervisors would have found her by now, since we already set that up in Picard. But she's played by Adelaide Kane, who is best known from the TV show Rain and also Power Rangers RPM. She plays the villain on that, or one of the villains on that show. The male agent from the Department of Temporal Investigations is seen showing La'an a T-Cars interface, which was first seen in the Voyager episode Relativity.
Yep. I like that callback that they used the same layout of the display as
Can
we
you
saw
guys
last in their Time Travelers.
explain that to someone who hasn't seen Voyager?
When the temporal investigation agent was bleeding on the floor, he pulled out the device and there was a holographic display that came up.
Okay, yeah. And she did it at the end too, right? Yeah.
Yeah. That display that we saw was also visible on the USS Relativity, which is a 29th century time ship for Starfleet.
This was not an ENT. This was VOY.
This is Voyager,
that was in Voyager.
Yeah. Okay.
Which I feel like if they had fiddled around with that device and got the holographic display to come up, they could have got a lot more information out of it, and maybe not missed the bridge exploding.
You know, like Edith Keeler must die. I don't know.
I like that they mentioned Stone Ages, but didn't quite go to the stone knives and bearskins.
Thank you, Rick.
Kirk mispronounces Lars' name as Noonien Soong, which of course we know who that was. That was a good touch, and that's pretty much it. Everything else that I had in the observation deck we've already talked about. So, does anybody have anything else they want to mention before we wrap things up?
I really hope this is not a foot in the door to bring that temporal Cold War bullshit back.
I wondered if this was setting up for a Khan movie, showing us what time period a Khan movie might take place in.
I haven't heard whether or not they're still working on a full cast recording podcast series about doing a Khan story. Excuse me.
I haven't heard anything lately.
So I don't know if they have any plans, but we had the folder for Project Khan in Picard season 2, and then we had this in this episode. So it does make me curious if someone somewhere has Khan plans. But if they do, they do. If they don't, they don't. I'm not really going to be surprised either way.
Hey, at least they got Khan's race right this time. Because he's always in scripts and stuff. He's always been Indian, but he's never been played by an Indian.
I love how they cast Benedict Cumberbatch, who is whiter than I am, and that's not possible.
Yeah.
Nobody's whiter than I am.
No, I am, and he's whiter than me.
Now, with what Rick said about the temporal Cold War, we got to remember that Archer wrapped up the entire temporal Cold War. Excuse me, in Enterprise, but we do still have.
Did he though?
We do still have the temporal war, not the temporal Cold War, but who's the guy? He's in Discovery. He's that weird sciencey guy. He's the director. Is it David
Cronenberg? They call him Cronenberg.
Thank you.
I forget
Cronenberg, sorry.
his character.
Because it's David Cronenberg. Yeah.
David Cronenberg talked about a temporal war, a hot war, not a Cold War. So they can put that pretty much wherever they want if they come up with a story that they think will fit into it.
Yeah, I would hate that.
Yeah,
I'd be
every
down for it.
series has their time travel episodes, and that's fine. But I prefer it when it's just an episode here or there, rather than it being like a larger storyline. Because they're headache inducing, and they're tired at this point.
Yeah. Maybe if they want to do like a small series of short treks that tell temporal war stories, there could be something interesting in that. And it wouldn't have to shoehorn directly into series that are already running.
It's
I
been
feel
so
like-
long since we've had a short trek. I don't feel like that's something that they're going to do anymore,
I think
Which
we've
especially
been-
since they're canceling series. But
yeah, the
Mm.
environment we're in right now, I think we will be lucky to get another season of Strange New Worlds, and maybe one more season of Lower Decks. The executive level at Paramount right now does not seem to be too thrilled with how Star Trek is performing. And
Yeah, I think peak Trek is over.
yeah,
As it's been 5 times over the last 20 years. So
Yeah,
it'll
give it
come back.
another decade. Yeah,
Yeah.
it'll
Yeah.
it'll come back.
If they could get their ducks in order as far as learning how to properly put out merch for Trek, if they could figure out their target audience and put out stuff that would actually sell. Star Wars, you make toys because the kids like Star Wars. For Star Trek, you need some other stuff, but there's plenty of stuff that there's plenty of stuff out there that you can buy now. It's not licensed. It violates copyright, but there's plenty of amazing Trek stuff that you can buy online if you know where to look. Paramount just has to make some of that stuff official, and they can bring in tons of money because Star Trek people love to buy Star Trek swag.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's bizarre that they don't do more of that. It's just, yeah, it's weird. I don't know what the thought process is over there. But
my
I
problem
mean,
with the
I
Star
guess
Trek,
it's. Sorry, go ahead.
my problem with the Star Trek stuff that's out there is it's all expensive as hell. It's all aimed at people that can drop $150 on a freaking bottle of wine just because it says Picard on the label.
Yeah, another of their ducks that is not in a row.
Yeah.
Just print out the label and put it on a $12 bottle from Publix.
Well, that's the thing. Every time I hear about some new thing, it's like, even the Eagle Moss, stuff before they went bankrupt they were more expensive than I could afford to buy every month.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love the idea of their little ships, but at, $40-50 a pop, I got kids to feed. Whereas, Star Wars, you can go buy, you can buy their shit by the pound.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's going to do it for us this week. I want to thank everybody for joining me here tonight. Why don't you guys let everybody know where they can find you? Neek?
You can find me at superanemic.com, where I write sort of concise recaps of every episode of Star Trek.
Kneecaps.
I'm gonna start calling
Yeah,
them kneecaps. Yeah.
Let's do it. Kneecaps. It's
Chris, how
canon.
about you?
I am a
That's
host
canon.
of the Quantum Leap podcast. You can find us at quantumleappodcast.com.
Scott, how about you?
You can find me right here on this show, on Cosmic Potato, the Super Fan Talk podcast, occasionally on Captain Game Show. And outside of podcasting, you can find my graphic artwork on my website, www.planetrisecreative.com.
And Rick.
You can find me at your local apparel store messing with the revolving doors.
I'm from space. All right. Thank you all for listening to this week's episode of That Star Trek Podcast. You can find many more episodes where we discuss all sorts of Star Trek properties, interview actors, writers, novelists, and all of that stuff. All of that is on our website at infinitepotato.com. We will return next week to cover an all new Strange New Worlds, which is titled Among the Lotus Eaters. Until then, remember to practice less vigorously going forward.